was the pivotal day of World War II, the most massive military operation in history. 160,000 Allied infantrymen converged on the beaches of Normandy to break through the impenetrable walls of German-held Fortress Europe. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. Walter Martinez, a sergeant in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, was among those in the first wave to hit the beaches. 14 German divisions were waiting for them on the battlefront. In 1942, an armada of American and British warships heads for North Africa to make the first Allied amphibious landing of World War II. Pushing back the Axis powers, the Allies now have their first foothold on foreign soil. From the moment when the Allied armies begin pushing back the German army, the ultimate goal has been to invade France. To do so, the Allies need to break through Hitler's formidable seawall. For 4 years, he has been building this barrier of concrete, steel, and artillery all along the Atlantic coast of France. September 1943, the American 1st Division, the Big Red One, lands at Liverpool. Veterans of landings in Africa and Sicily, they joined the 1,500,000 Americans gathering in England for the invasion of Europe. Among them is 22-year-old Walter Martinez with the 2nd Ranger Battalion.
They broke our outfits up, and when we went there to England, we were what you call like replacement, repa depots. And when we got there, we were filling in different outfits, you know, to bring him up to strength, because some of these outfits, particularly mine, they had fought in Anzio and Salerno. So in England, they came around to the repo depots looking for us, very new from the state, even though some of us had 2 and 3 years to fill in these outfits, but the Ranger outfit was strictly a volunteer. Rangers as a whole, they spearhead for outfits. Spearhead means that you have to break through.
To prepare Operation Overlord, as Churchill has named the invasion, 16 million tons of weaponry will have arrived in New England by invasion time. Meanwhile, Allied troops are subjected to the most rigorous training they have ever known.
I was trained real hard. We learned how to jump, using all kinds of TNT dynamite to blow up for railroad tracks behind the lines, and most anything that had to do with combat, we were pretty well trained. The rifles and guns like that, we knew pretty well, but just tactics. As a matter of fact, the British liaison, they used to say, you guys trained harder than the war it actually is, and some of these guys knew because they had fought in North Africa. The people who trained me were Rangers, and sometimes I wonder if I was more afraid of them than I was of the Germans, because these guys were really tough and rugged. We had boxing tournaments within the battalions and division regimentals, and if you boxed, they give you 3 days off in London so you can cure your wounds.
Across the English Channel, the Germans continue to fortify their strength. Since its conception, the Atlantic Wall has been Hitler's obsession. Thousands of laborers have worked to forge its guns, machine gun bunkers, and concrete obstacles, which have made it into a fearsome barricade. The wall would even be stronger if Germany's commander-in-chief in the West, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, believed in it as much as Hitler. With 2,000 miles of coastline to defend, von Rundstedt believes that an army can't cover every inch equally. Assuming the initial Allied landing is successful, von Rundstedt plans to move his powerful reserve forces to that location and drive the invasion army back into the sea. Hitler's decorated Field Marshal Erwin Rommel is ordered to France in late 1943 to conduct an inspection tour of the Atlantic defenses. Rommel concludes that the success of Rundstedt's defense depends on air cover. However, the beleaguered Luftwaffe can no longer guarantee that, so he urges drastic revisions. In January 1944, Rommel is given principal responsibility for the coast defense. Convinced that the invasion team must be destroyed before it ever gets across the beaches, Rommel orders every gap in the wall closed. The high water line, he says, must be the main fighting line. Rommel sets about fortifying the approaches. He orders the construction of submerged obstacles, concrete protrusions, spikes, and mines to slow the landing. On the beaches, the artillery is roofed and walled with concrete, laced together with miles of barbed wire. 4 million landmines are buried in the Normandy sand. For the next 7 miles back, every open area is flooded or planted with obstacles to frustrate any airborne landing. Every available soldier, from baker to clerk, is called into service. The first 24 hours of the landing will be decisive. Even with troop strength depleted by the demands of the Russian front and the Allied landings at Anzio, 14 German divisions are lined up and waiting by the middle of May. One of them is the Panzer Lehr that is brought in from Hungary.
Well, the Panzer Lehr was one of the crack divisions of the German army, and it had been brought to Normandy almost at full strength. They only had 2 weeks to prepare for the fighting in Normandy, but the Panzer Lehr was in good shape. It had armaments, it had Tiger tanks, it had personnel, and it was, in fact, perhaps the best fighting division in the German army.
The actual deployment of the Panzer Lehr at Normandy creates a division in the German High Command.
The great debate in the German defenses was between Rundstedt and Rommel. And Rundstedt believed that to stop the invasion, you would have to allow the troops to get ashore, and then, when they were ashore but could not get out of the pocket, hit them with everything you had. In other words, to allow the landings to occur and then hit the troops once they were ashore. Rommel, on the other hand, felt that the only way to stop the invasion was to hit the troops on the beaches before they could get ashore.
To boost morale, General Dwight D. Eisenhower visits the troops in England.
Whenever you saw somebody of high brass come near the battle area, it was impressive, and we always found him to be a well-spoken guy. He didn't look as rough to us as the man who he really was when he had to make that faithful decision, you know, D-Day.
To keep the Germans confused about the invasion point, the Allies staged numerous probing maneuvers up and down the French coast. At dawn, June 1st, the morning is gray and dull. It also marks the beginning of the worst weather in 30 years. Bad news for the Allies. The invasion is dependent on the tide for troop landings, moonlight for the airborne, and calm seas. The simultaneous beginning of a new Russian offensive designed to preoccupy the Germans has been set. All this planning depends on the weather. The odds are against the Allies from the start. The British are assigned to 2 beaches, codenamed Gold and Sword. The Canadians are assigned to one named Juno. The Americans get 2 named Omaha and Utah. These 5 beaches of Normandy form an 80-mile strip along the Atlantic Wall. Finally, on the morning of June 5th, after already calling the ships back once because of bad weather, General Eisenhower makes the agonizing decision to go, and the greatest invasion in history is underway. The Allied probing maneuvers have created confusion within German intelligence.
The Allies had carefully planted phony information for a year before the invasion. They had been bombing the Pas-de-Calais regularly, and that's the shortest route across the Channel. The Normandy route is considerably longer.
The weather odds are also analyzed by Field Marshal Rommel. On June 5th, he leaves his headquarters to go home for his wife's birthday, convinced the Allies will never land in bad weather. But Allied forces are preparing to deliver Rommel a surprise. June 6, 1944. The seas in the Channel are typically rough as the armada of 5,300 ships move toward an obstacle that separates Europe from its liberation. Overhead, thousands of fighter planes. Also, hundreds of troop transports and gliders carrying the paratroop vanguard of the invasion. Ideal for the invasion. The waves are high and the clouds are threatening. But the loading of the convoys goes on following General Eisenhower's orders.
At that time, we had no emotion, no feeling. We just were so tense in the job that was before us that about any order he gave, we would have followed.
What the Germans saw was a sight that had never been seen before and will never be seen again. An invasion of such dimensions as to be almost incredible. The sea was full of ships. The first question was, is this the real invasion? The men who were on the beaches who saw those 5,000 ships knew very well that this was the real invasion. But the intelligence reports back in Berlin left the question as to whether this was the real thing. There was always the question in Hitler's mind and the minds of the other commanders, was this the real thing, or was this just to draw the panzers away from the Pas-de-Calais, where the real invasion would follow?
Loaded with 32 men each, the landing craft start their run for the beach.
You have a lot of thoughts. What bothered me the most was that we were so jammed, and a lot of guys got seasick, so we had to walk to the mess. Let me put it this way, it was very uncomfortable. The motion sickness was actually taking its toll. Guys were ready to swim in if they had to.
It was an armada, the greatest armada ever put together in the history of the world. And when the Germans saw it, they could only marvel at it, and they knew that the war was over. There's a marvelous comment in Cornelius Ryan's book on D-Day, in which one of the German officers who survived said later, "When I saw that, I knew it was the end for Germany."
For the 8 companies of men approaching Omaha Beach, the nightmarish obstacles Rommel has planted begin to pay off for the Germans. Here the struggle is the fiercest. Omaha Beach is 6 miles of hell, with 100-foot cliffs at either end.
The outfits like the big red one and the 29th that hit the beach, they got a chance to see the silhouette and the pillboxes that were, particularly one giant pillbox. There was a little bit of everything. There was a little bit of confusion. There is a little fear there, but you don't recognize it. I think the confusion overwhelms in the commotion and the confusion. And you don't function like a human being, you function more like a machine.
Amid sinking tanks and exploding landing craft, raked by relentless machine gun fire, many of the men are mowed down before they even hit the sand.
The Germans were so completely outnumbered and had no air support whatsoever. Complete control of the air for the Allies. I think it was something like 2 German planes in the air that day, so that the Germans really didn't have a chance, and they knew it.
While landing at Omaha Beach turns into disaster, Utah Beach is nearly the opposite. The U.S. 4th Division lands there with little resistance and moves rapidly inland. At Juneau Beach, the high seas and German defenses are frustrating the Canadians. The sandy strip is marked with the dead and dying of both sides. Sword Beach is small, but because it is a naval port, it is guarded by heavy gun emplacements. Weather and terrain take many casualties from the British first wave. At Gold Beach, amphibious tanks are vital in wiping out enemy gun emplacements. The men are not fighting alone. 10,000 flights of aircraft battered German defenses with more than 11,000 tons of bombs. Of all the beaches, Omaha is where the battle is fiercest and results in the most casualties.
That was the hard area there where they had cut railroad tracks and they had buried them in an angle, so when our gliders went in there, they took a tremendous toll of our people. It was a hell of a stench of gunfire, a lot of wreckage on that beach, a lot of bodies.
German air strength had been moved out of Normandy just a few days before. They had been pulled back for rest, recreation, and repair, so that the German fighting strength was less than it would have been even a few days before.
In my case, I was in Punta Hack. What I saw was rugged rocks, which we hit a lot. We fired hooks to climb up on ropes to go up to the top. We were supposed to knock out some heavy German artillery pieces up on top of that hill. When we got up there wasn't any. They had already moved them out. When we got up there, a lot of snipers. They were retreating. Evidently, that was the last of the working crew, wherever they moved those guns that they had.
Also, there was another factor on D-Day. Rommel was not present to command the German troops on the beaches. And also, the panzers were held back for 10 hours because Hitler couldn't make the decision to commit them.
With troops moving inland everywhere, it is apparent that the Allies' gamble has paid off. Although nobody knows the exact figure, approximately 160,000 men are ashore by the end of D-Day. The beachhead is secure.
It was really, say, well, what I went through, and I'm here. You know, it's a weird feeling that's very hard to explain. I'm here.
The invasion of Normandy would signal the death knell for German domination of Europe. For that prize, nearly 4,000 men would give their lives on Omaha Beach alone. By day's end, Germans are surrendering or in retreat. Their Reich is beginning to crumble. Looking back on the beachhead, soldiers will remember this landing as the longest day.